Take a seat and get some work done, or get cozy in your bed. Tonight we've got some stories to tell in the rain. Before we begin, if you think you might fall asleep, please introduce yourself in the comments, and while you're there, please like and subscribe. I'm always interested in knowing what country everyone is from, so let us know in the comments and share what time it is where you are. Thank you once more for joining me. Get cozy, dim the lights, grab a glass of water, and make sure you've locked your door. Don't forget to say hello in the comments. It's time to close your eyes. To preface this, I love to drive. I'd love to go on drives for hours to nowhere, with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities. And I'd usually take these drives at night since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was, until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a cluster of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend. I couldn't focus on anything else and decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too long since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend. I kept driving and was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles back from the road were lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away, snow started to cover them entirely. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder while the rest was jutted onto the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. In this part of the country, cell phone reception is pretty bad most of the time. But more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road, at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside, with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of investigation, discovery, and criminal minds, and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything I would leave, and the moment there was reception I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So, again I shout, "Hey! What happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a while, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a rough voice responding to me. I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car, fast. The person didn't have any blood on them, nor did they appear injured in any way, and they were wearing a mask, not like a face mask for COVID, or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies. And they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was. I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas as soon as I noticed those things, and drove like a bat straight out of hell. My heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, but I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, Troy, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of city limits he couldn't do much on his end. But he could get in contact with the local police or sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs I managed to tell him what happened, not even 10 minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, really concerned for my safety, and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot to take a look and that they would try to catch the guys who did it. But with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic, the thought never came to mind until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made, in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. It all started with a normal day at work. I worked at a small grocery store at the time, and my duties consisted of gathering shopping carts in the parking lot and bagging groceries, the usual minimum wage stuff. It was raining that morning, and of course, I was assigned to carts. About 2 hours into my shift, I saw a man rushing to get his groceries into the car. I ran over to him and started helping him with his bags. "Mind if I help you get out of the rain?" "Yes. Thank you so much." As he was closing his trunk, he looked at me with a very surprised look on his face. He lowered his eyebrows, skinned me from head to toe, and smirked. "Are you a new hire?" "No, I've been here for a couple of months." "Oh, you are very pretty," he said in a weirdly sensual tone. "Thank you. Have a good day." I shut it down. I was not interested. As I was walking back to the store to hide until he left, I could feel him watching me while I walked away. Nevertheless, I continued to work, not really thinking about it. After my lunch, I was at the register bagging groceries, and I noticed that same man from earlier walk in. I pretended I didn't see him and just kept bagging. He came up to the register and got a single chocolate bar. I didn't give him a bag. He stands towering over me and says, "Are you going to bag my item?" "Oh, sorry. I didn't know you wanted a bag for one thing." I put his chocolate bar in a bag and told him to have a good day. "When are you off work, sweetheart?" "Ah, man, I'm not comfortable giving that information out." He returned with, "That's okay. You've been here, what, 5 hours? You probably get off around 7, right?" He smiled, winked at me, and walked away. Disgusted, I went to my manager and told her what happened. She told me not to work the lot anymore and to ask someone to walk me to my car. So by the end of my shift, I had a male coworker walk me to my truck, and we scanned the parking lot, looking for this man's car. We didn't see him, so my coworker went back inside and I started my truck. I called my mom to tell her about what happened, and once she answered, I left the parking lot. Literally, the second I turned onto the road, I saw his car pull onto the road behind me. I told my mom I thought he was going to follow me, and she just told me to drive around to try and lose him. I drove around for about 20 minutes, just going in circles around my town. I hit a red light and he pulled up next to me and started yelling something to me out his open window. I, of course, pretended he wasn't there, but I could still hear what he was saying. "You would bear some good kids for me. You'd make a great slave for me, little lady." He then started being very explicit about what he was going to do to me if he caught me. I told my mom I was going to dial 911, and if I wasn't home in an hour, then call the police. While I was trying to call the cops, the man speeds ahead of my truck and starts brake checking me. Frantic, I wait for the closest intersection and turn up the block. My phone fell under my seat while I was turning, so I decided to go to the nearest open establishment and run in and hide and have someone else call for help. The closest open business I could find was a convenience store at a gas station. I pulled in, parked, and ran for my life into the store. I told the clerk what's happening, and she took me to the break room and locked me in there. While processing that I might have survived this ordeal, I hear the doors of the storefront start violently rattling, and before I knew it, the clerk was locking herself in the break room with me. She was on the phone with the police, and they were on their way. We were silent. Cowering in a dark room, I found myself feeling guilty for wrapping another woman into our worst fear. My thoughts were racing through what I said to him. Did I lead him on? I just told him to have a good day. Has he been following me for longer than tonight? How did he know what car I drive? Are the police going to get here in time? Are we going to die? Finally, the small room was illuminated with red and blue lights from the crack under the door. We hear a voice over the intercom telling us it's safe to come out. Whilst shaking, the clerk took out her keys and opened the door, so we walked out and gave our statements. After the police leave, I turned to my unexpected savior and profusely thanked her. We cry, hug, and she walks me to my car. The next night I went back and brought her some food and an Amazon gift card. I have been in a near-fatal car accident, 10 feet away from a mountain lion in the wild, but I can tell you, with total honesty, I thought that was the end of my line. Thank you for reading. Stay aware, be cautious, stay safe. This encounter would have happened a little over 10 years ago. I would have been about 26 at the time. I can't remember exactly what year this was, but it was around 2012. At the time, I was frequently going out with my friends to bars and parties, and hanging out until pretty late most weekends. The friend's house that I usually hung out at was on a side street just off a main road where a lot of popular and crowded bars and restaurants were. You had to park on the street at his house, and during the weekend when it was busy, it was pretty common to have to park a number of blocks away. The street closer to the bars was pretty nice, but if you went a few blocks in the opposite direction, it got a little sketchier at night. After a night of hanging out, I had to walk back to my car pretty late, which was parked a number of blocks away towards the slightly sketchier area. This was during the winter, so I was wearing some kind of heavy sweater or pullover and beanie hat. This detail is only important as you couldn't really gather much idea about what I looked like from a distance in the dark, aside from my general height and build. There wasn't much through traffic as you got further away from the bars, and the roads were pretty dark without any streetlights. As I was walking down the sidewalk, a car started slowly creeping down the street, matching my pace as it pulled up beside me and then stopped. The window of the car rolled down, and driving the car was an attractive young woman who said that I looked cold and that I should let her give me a ride to where I was going. She seemed very friendly. I indicated that I wasn't parked far away and appreciated the offer, but was going to just keep walking. She then tried really hard to convince me to get in the car with her, since it was so cold. No small talk to establish any information about me to make sure I wasn't a weirdo, just asking me to get in the car pretty aggressively. Based on what I was wearing and how dark it was, there was no way she really could have had much idea about what I actually looked like to possibly find me attractive, and even if she did, I don't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight when they're alone in their car. There were about 10 bars nearby she could have gone to if she just wanted to pick up a guy. There was no reason I could think of that she would have to resort to driving around offering to pick up strangers. She continued to drive alongside me and offered me a ride again, which I declined and kept going. I picked up my pace and she eventually drove off. As soon as she was a few blocks away, I quickly got to my car and made sure there was nobody lurking around or close by. The whole scenario felt off and didn't make sense to me. I asked my friends about it later, and all of the women agreed they wouldn't offer a random guy a ride, especially at night time, in that kind of scenario, even if the guy looked like Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum. My suspicion is that there was someone laid down in the back seat of the car out of view with a weapon waiting to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't really figure out any reason she would be offering rides like that to complete strangers in the middle of the night, as it would be very unsafe for her to just pick up random strangers. I just assumed there had to be something nefarious going on in that car, and I do wonder what would have happened if anyone just hopped in the car with her. Back when I was 18 years old, I was house-sitting with a girl I was studying with. The family we were house-sitting for went to the same church as her, but I didn't really know them well myself. It was more to keep her company in a huge house. This was 1997 when the average teen like me didn't have a cell phone. During that week, there was a short break in the school calendar, which is why this family was away, and why the streets in the area were quieter than usual. My apartment as well as the house we sat for was not far from the university. My apartment was actually a 3-minute walk from it, and the house a further 5 minutes by car. So being a student neighborhood, it was particularly quiet this week. The first weird thing that happened during the week I was at this house was that I dreamed I was driving through a dark forest on a hilly dirt road with no lights anywhere except for those from my car's headlights. As I started to go down a hill, the headlights suddenly cut out and everything went dark. The car slowed down to a stop and died. I woke up. In the morning I went out to my car and it wouldn't start. It had been working perfectly the day before. I had to call a guy to come fix it. It was the starter motor. Well, that was the first creepy thing that happened that week. About a day later, it was Friday. I planned on driving back home to my parents who lived in a smaller town about 45 minutes away. I packed up my stuff at the big house and was going to head over to my apartment to collect whatever else I needed for the weekend. That trip between the house and apartment was, as I mentioned, only 5 minutes or so away. Since it was winter, it was dark by the time I left at around 7 p.m. As I was driving from the house, I noticed in my rearview mirror the headlights of the car behind me tailing me really close. Whenever I would turn, it would also turn. Back then I was cautious, but not overly so. Cautious enough to notice in such a short distance that something weird was going on behind me. But then when I pulled up to a traffic light, it wasn't there anymore. Relief. Short-lived. The car was now beside me. I looked to my right, and there was a man inside. Alone. Smiling at me. Looking like a maniac. For a moment I thought, geez, I should really drive with a beanie on at night so people can't see that I'm a petite 5'2" female with long blonde hair down to my waist. I also thought, well, he's in the lane to turn right, so I'm good. I pulled off, and the headlights were behind me again. What an ass, I thought. Who drives like that? Thank goodness my turn is coming up on the left soon. After another minute or two of this tailgating, I slowed down, strategically didn't indicate, and made a sudden sharp left into my driveway, opened the automatic gates and shot inside. The gates closed behind me. I gave out a sigh of relief, thinking that the drama was over. I gathered a few things from the car to take up with me and noticed on my way over to the stairwell that there was a man at the gate that had just closed behind me. He was still on the other side and I was at the far end of the parking lot, but I could make out it was the dude from the tailgating car. He was jumping up, shaking the gate with absolute rage. Well, I was safely on this side, so I wasn't completely gripped with fear. And besides, there was a group of students making a noise nearby arriving for a party or something. I headed to the stairs and started going from ground level to the first floor. Rounding the stairs on the first floor, I noticed someone running across the parking lot towards the staircase. In hindsight, I still can't fathom why I didn't realize what had happened. I guess it's because I subconsciously knew that there was the group being let in through the pedestrian gate. As I was rounding the staircase between the second and third floors, someone suddenly touched me. I spun around. The guy. He had slipped in as part of the small crowd. He said something. I said something sassy back and told him to F off. Then I turned my back on him to continue up the stairs. I lived on the third floor. He grabbed me from behind and held my back against his chest with his left arm around my neck. I felt something being held against my right side. Aw crap. A knife. He led me down. I remember thinking that the light was broken on the bottom level. This can't end well. But I was calm. I resisted slightly, and he tightened his grip. I felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen. I started to become a dead weight. He started to drop me. I was groin level. I elbowed. It connected. He dropped me but spun around to face me. He ripped the front of my button-down top. Then he stopped. He looked at someone behind me. Someone taller than him. His eyes went wide. He turned and ran. I screamed. Then I too turned around to see who had come to help. There was no one there, but people came out of their apartments after that. The police were called. This was the second time they were there that night. Turns out the other weird thing that happened was that my dad had already called the police and they had come past an hour before. My mom had had a weird feeling all evening and had hassled my dad endlessly that something bad was going to happen to me. She had been right. As it turned out, they caught him. I identified him in a lineup. He was a serial offender in the area. He was accused of assaulting something like 14 women. One had thrown herself out the first floor of her apartment to get away from him and broken her leg. Weeks later, the police called me. Before his trial, his cell door had been left open. He was gone. Apparently an inside job. I've had a few creepy things happen to me in my life, but this one still makes me think about how things could have gone wrong very quickly. I'm a 20-year-old female, and this story takes place back when I used to live in southern Indiana, in a seriously remote area. It was a weekend night, and my best friend and I were heading home after a graveyard shift at a local waffle joint. She decided to pick up her dog from her house so we could spend the night at my place. That's important later. We started heading into the rural countryside where I lived, and to get to my house, you had to travel down a long, narrow dirt road. About a mile in, we spotted a truck's headlights. As we got closer, we realized it was a nice truck, probably from around 2018. I can't say I know much about cars, so cut me some slack. The truck was parked sideways, blocking the entire path. Confused, I got out of the car and asked if the driver was okay. He looked hopeful when he saw me at first and said, "I'm just waiting for a friend to come get me. My truck's stuck." He smiled at me, but I noticed his pupils were nearly completely dilated. He glanced back at my car, saw that I had someone with me, and noticed the dog sticking its head out the window. His smile quickly faded, and he remarked, "Pit bulls are mean and nasty." With that, he turned around and got back in his truck. I returned to my friend and said, "Put this in reverse and use whatever hood race skills you have to get us out of here." We reversed my poor 95 Caddy, which really shouldn't have been driving on a dirt road, and made our way back to the main road, feeling relieved. We took a different route home. But then, to our surprise, the same guy was parked on that road, standing off to the side, smiling and staring into our headlights. We were on the verge of panicking and floored the gas pedal the rest of the way home. I don't know how he got there before us or what his intentions were, but I'm thankful I wasn't alone, being a pretty naive college girl at the time. Even though the presence of the pit bull probably saved us from that man, the dog actually ended up randomly snapping at my friend a few months later, causing her serious injuries. It had been a good dog its entire life, and I know she was a good owner, so I guess it's just an instinct thing with pit bulls. They can snap at any moment. My name is Danny, and I was 19 when this happened. I lived with my parents and wanted to move out, so I bought a car with the money I'd saved and eventually got a job for Uber Eats. I'd seen their advertisements all over. Apparently it was easy money with flexible hours. All you had to do was pay for fuel. I had a few friends tell me how good it was, so I figured I'd go through the sign-up process and give it a shot. However, the reality was quite different. Driving around on a tight schedule made the job pretty stressful, and the payouts were often just a few bucks. If you didn't claim the orders with high tips or payouts, then you'd barely make enough to cover the fuel. Being a teenager, I only had to cover my car payments and insurance, so I didn't need to make a fortune. But it did feel like I was getting shortchanged given the time and effort required. I pushed the idea of finding another job to the back of my mind because I was a bit lazy, but everything changed after a particular incident. I accepted an order from KFC and set off to deliver it to the customer's location. It was a pretty large order, enough for maybe 4 or 5 people, but the pay for this delivery was much higher than usual and the tip was $20, which was unheard of. It tells you on the app when you accept an order how much you'll get paid. While en route to the destination, I received a text through the Uber Eats app. The customer was asking about my whereabouts. The app said delivery time was about 30 minutes and I was on track to be there in about 15. They could literally see my live location on there, so I didn't understand why they were asking. I didn't see the point in pulling over to reply, so I just kept driving, as I'd be there in about 5 minutes. Within pretty much a few seconds, they sent another message, impatiently asking me why it's taking so long. I had only picked up the order a couple of minutes ago, and they could literally see this on the app, so it wasn't as if I was running late. I ignored the weird messages, thinking it was probably a mistake on their part, or that they were drunk or just a typical Karen. I knew the area reasonably well, but I'd never really been to this part of town. It was located in, I guess, what you'd call the hood. It was a pretty rough neighborhood, gang violence, and a lack of police presence, most people knew not to come here. But I'd driven through a few times and knew it wasn't too dangerous. The address was to an apartment building, and as I approached the place, I noticed that a lot of people were staring at me. I parked my car and checked my phone. Another message had come through with some harsh language, telling me that I better hurry up. I usually leave my phone on the stand, where I can see the delivery instructions, but I knew it was a bad idea to keep it out in the open, so I took it with me. The instructions said to come inside and deliver it to the customer's apartment, which was a little unusual, but I figured they just didn't want to come down. I pressed the button for the apartment number and was buzzed in. As I climbed the stairwell, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were people just scattered around this building. I had to step over some passed out woman on the stairs, and I really wanted to just drop the bag and run. I reached the door to the apartment, and a voice from inside told me to come in. I hesitated for a moment, confused as to why they couldn't just come and grab it. But I was on the clock and wanted to get this delivery done. I walked into the apartment, and as the door closed behind me, I realized my mistake. All the lights were off, and the only source of visibility in the room was the massive TV they had on the wall. I looked around and saw a couple of shady-looking characters. I offered them the bag, and they looked at me like I was disgusting. The guy who seemed to be the leader gestured for someone else to take it from me. He started circling me as I stood there, completely frozen. I had no idea what the hell I was doing, or how I'd ended up in such a dangerous situation. He didn't hesitate to start poking at me, asking me what I got. I told him I just had the food and that I've gotta go. He laughed and told me to sit. I was completely shitting myself at this point. He starts quizzing me about why I took so long and what can I do to make up for it. I told him I could refund the tip, and this made him freak out. Tip? What tip? I ain't pay you no tip. I stupidly pulled out my phone to show him that he put down a $20 tip. He snatched it out of my hand and told me that he's taking the refund. Everyone else started laughing. I was being completely humiliated in front of these people, and I was powerless. I passively asked for my phone back, but I'm not the biggest guy in the world, and I was really trying not to die, so when he refused, I just accepted my fate. He sat down and started looking through the bag, grabbing the food he wanted. He looked over at me and asked me what the F I was still doing there, jumping up and pulling out a knife as he said it. I apologized and quickly made my way to the door and ran down the stairs. I almost tripped over the unconscious woman on my way out. I got in the car, and I've never driven so fast in my life. I drove to somewhere safe and immediately broke down into tears. My whole body was shaking and I was hyperventilating. I was a complete mess. What the hell was I thinking, walking up and going inside someone's apartment, never mind a place like that? I'd literally been told to never go inside anywhere, but all I could think of was that big tip. I drove home and told my parents what had happened. They were really supportive and glad that I was okay, but they were furious that I'd not followed their advice about going into dangerous places. We got the phone locked remotely, so you probably can't use it for much, but I know I'm never getting it back. I found out weeks later when I got a new phone that Uber also suspended my account because he said the order wasn't delivered. In their defense, as far as they could see, I just disappeared with the delivery and never showed up again. So he got a full refund and free food and my phone. Losing my phone and my job really sucked, but I was grateful that I got away unharmed. I had no interest in working as a delivery driver after that and got a job at a restaurant instead. Earlier this year, I borrowed my dad's Tesla to go visit my aunt who lived in the countryside. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and I love driving, especially my dad's car, so I was glad he let me take it. The road trip took me through some pretty remote areas, but it was a pretty smooth drive heading over. I passed through one small town that had a charging station for the car. Whilst I was there recharging the Tesla, I got quite a lot of attention. Apparently not many electric cars came through the area, and they had lots of questions for me. I traveled the rest of the way with no issues, and I stayed with my aunt for a few days and eventually decided to head back home on a sunny afternoon. I began my journey around 3 o'clock. The first part of the drive was through a busy town, and after that, I passed through some quiet suburban neighborhoods. But as I was taking the same route back, I soon found myself once again on the long narrow highway that seemed to stretch and turn endlessly. It was peaceful, but as the hours passed, I started to feel more tired. To keep myself awake, I turned on the radio quite loud, hoping it would wake me up a bit. I squinted at the road, trying to focus, and that's when I noticed a small glimmer of light in the distance. It was the reflection of my car's headlights on another vehicle parked by the side of the road. As I approached, it became evident that the car was abandoned. It was dark, and the windows were tinted. The area was quite remote, and the thought of getting stranded there was unsettling. The nearest town was an hour's drive back. I continued my journey but kept my eyes open, just in case someone was nearby. A few minutes later, I noticed a blindingly bright light in my rearview mirror. The intense glare made it impossible to see the car, only their dazzling lights. They seemed to be getting closer, so I reduced my speed, thinking they would soon overtake. But as I continued down the road, I saw something unsettling up ahead. There was another car right in the middle of the road, blocking my path completely. The car had its lights turned off, and I didn't see it until I was almost right upon it. I slammed on the brakes as soon as I realized what was happening. The lights in the rearview mirror kept getting brighter. I could hear the sound of an approaching vehicle behind me. I decided to turn my car around to escape the situation, but when I looked back, there was another car parked diagonally behind me, effectively sealing off any retreat. Suddenly, it all clicked in my mind. I heard the doors of the cars around me opening and closing. Panic coursed through my veins. Without thinking, I veered off the road, plowing into the trees, attempting to bypass the obstructions and get to the other side of the road, past the parked cars. I was so preoccupied with avoiding trees and avoiding getting my car stuck that I didn't even look to see if the people were chasing me. About 10 seconds after driving off the road, a gunshot echoed. I looked back and they were chasing me. The bullet hit somewhere in front of my car. Fear and adrenaline pulsed through me as I continued maneuvering around the twisted dirt road. Another shot rang out, hitting the back of my car. I was driving like a maniac, going full speed through these tight trees, desperately trying to lose them. My Tesla was impressively handling the practically off-road adventure that I'd pushed it through. Eventually, I could see that I lost them, but I didn't slow down until I hit the highway again. It took about 10 minutes of driving before I regained enough cell phone reception to call the police. The attackers didn't catch up, and as far as I know, they were never apprehended. To this day, I can't help but wonder about how they had such an elaborate setup. Had they spotted me coming in an expensive car and somehow thrown together a plan? Was it the guys I'd been speaking to when charging my car? I told them that I was going to be heading back through in a few days. It really bothers me not knowing, but as you can imagine, I'm not allowed to drive my dad's Tesla anymore. My name is Christine, and I was 23 years old when this unforgettable New Year's Eve story happened. I was out with my beloved dog, Max. It was a few hours before midnight, so I took him for a quick walk before getting ready for the party. Max was usually well behaved and fine without a lead, so I decided to let him off for just a minute to enjoy the crisp air as we strolled through our neighborhood. The evening was filled with anticipation. People around the town were preparing for the upcoming New Year's festivities. The streets were lined with colorful decorations, and you could feel the excitement in the air. As Max and I walked along the sidewalk, he was happily sniffing around, enjoying the scents of the night. The night was still young, and there was no sign of chaos yet. Little did I know that everything would change within the next minute. It was then that the first firework exploded in the sky, lighting up the darkness with brilliant colors and a deafening bang. I instinctively grabbed Max, pulling him close, but it was too late. The sudden noise startled him, and in an instant, he broke free from my grip and bolted down the street. I called out his name frantically, but he didn't respond. The barrage of fireworks drowned out my cries, and I watched in panic as he disappeared into the night. My heart raced as I realized I had to find him amidst the chaos of the celebrations. I spent hours driving around the neighborhood, searching for my dog. The fireworks kept lighting up the sky, and the noise was deafening. It was hard to focus with all the bright lights and explosions, but I had to find him. If I was distracted by the fireworks, then he was probably going through hell. Every corner I turned, every street I drove through, I called out his name. I was desperate to bring him back home, to keep him safe from the fireworks. The celebration was all around me, but all I wanted was to find my furry friend. I told my friends and family that I wouldn't be coming out as I was looking for my dog. A few of them volunteered to look for him too, but even if they found him, I wasn't convinced that he'd go with them. Finally, as I turned down a dimly lit street, I spotted a crowd of people surrounding a public bus, as if there were some sort of disturbance. My heart leaped with hope. I parked the car and rushed towards the crowd. I could tell by the chatter and the body language that they were reacting to some kind of animal on the bus. I made my way to the door and climbed on. He was there hiding in the corner, barking frantically at every firework whistling through the sky. I spoke to him gently, and he recognized my voice. The fireworks kept going off, but I didn't care. I reached down and picked him up, cradling him in my arms. He nestled against my chest, seeking comfort from the frightening night. I thanked everyone for trying to help him and rushed him back to my car. I got back in my car, holding Max securely. The drive home was a little quieter, the sound of fireworks slowly fading. Max had been found, and the new year could finally begin with both of us safe and sound. I sat in the car with Max, watching the fireworks through the window. The bright lights that had once scared him now seemed to twinkle in celebration of our reunion. It was a New Year's Eve we'd never forget, one that sent me on a wild late-night drive, looking for my best friend. On a bitterly cold winter night, I found myself in the kind of situation that would chill any parent to the bone. My two young kids sat shivering in the back seat of our car as I tried to keep my composure. We were stranded on a snow-covered road in the middle of nowhere, far from the nearest town. The car's engine had sputtered and coughed its last breath a while ago, and my phone had no signal. Desperation clung to the cold air as I tried to reassure my children that help was on the way. I had called a tow truck, but it seemed like hours had passed since then, and the icy darkness was unrelenting. Just as I was losing all hope of being rescued, a set of headlights appeared in the distance, slowly growing brighter. Relief washed over me as a man pulled up in a pickup truck. His frosty breath covered his face in the cold night air. "Looks like you folks could use some help," he called out. His voice was friendly, but something about the situation had my guard up. I was hesitant, but the thought of my children suffering in the cold pushed me to accept his offer. "Yes, thank you," I replied, trying to hide my unease. "We've already called a tow truck, but it's taking a while." The man didn't waste any time. He opened the hood of my car and started tinkering with the engine. His hands moved deftly, almost too quickly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the minutes turned into what felt like an eternity, the man turned his attention to my children. "You know, it's pretty darn cold out here," he said, looking towards them with a warm smile. "Why don't you let them sit in my truck? It's nice and toasty in there." I hesitated, glancing at my children. They were practically blue from the cold, their teeth chattering uncontrollably. "No thank you, we're okay," I stammered, trying to muster some courage. But the man was persistent, insisting that it was the best thing for them. "It won't be long, just until I get this fixed up," he said, his smile never faltering. "I've got hot chocolate in the truck, they'll love it." The children began to whine, their tiny voices filled with misery. I felt a lump form in my throat. "All right, just for a little while," I relented, my heart pounding in my chest. As my son and daughter climbed into the stranger's truck, I watched anxiously from a distance. Minutes turned into what felt like hours as the man continued to work on my car. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and my mind raced with dark scenarios. The kids, wrapped in the stranger's blankets, seemed oblivious to the unsettling atmosphere that had settled around us. They giggled and chatted about how cozy and warm the truck was. My daughter even mentioned how nice it would be to spend the night in a comfy bed instead of the cold car. The stranger, who had been fiddling with my car engine, suddenly looked up and said, "You know, the nearest town is only about a half-hour's drive from here. I'd be more than happy to take your kids there, give them a warm meal and a place to sleep for the night. It's not safe for them to stay out here." My heart raced as my children's faces lit up with excitement. They began pleading with me to let them go, their voices filled with innocence and trust. "Mom, please, it'll be fun," my son exclaimed. Despite the freezing cold that still gripped me, a chill of a different kind ran down my spine. I absolutely hated everything about this situation. I needed to protect my children, but letting them drive away with a stranger obviously wasn't an option. But neither was freezing to death. They weren't helping the situation at all. I hated how naive they were, and I hated how they would ignore my attempts to give them a serious stare when I was trying to communicate to them that we were in a bad situation. The stranger's insistence, coupled with my children's growing enthusiasm, created an agonizing dilemma. I mustered all the politeness I could, and replied, "Thank you so much for your offer, but the tow truck should be here soon, and we'll be on our way. We wouldn't want to trouble you any further." The man's expression changed. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at me with a hint of frustration. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to help. It's not safe for your kids out here in the cold. I promise, I'm a good guy." The standoff continued, my heart pounding in my chest as the tension thickened. The stranger's insistence clashed with my maternal instincts, and I felt a growing urgency to protect my children from whatever threat might be lurking behind his seemingly kind offer. As the minutes passed, the kids continued to shiver despite the warmth of the stranger's truck. I couldn't ignore their discomfort any longer. Trying to sound as composed as possible, I said to them, "It's time to get back into our car. The tow truck should be here soon." The children reluctantly agreed, and we climbed out of the stranger's truck, thanking him for his help. As we made our way back to our car, the man's eyes followed us. He seemed disappointed but didn't insist any further. I hurriedly bundled the kids back into the car, and we locked the doors. Just as we settled in, the distant sound of a tow truck's engine reached our ears. The tow truck arrived, its lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. The driver, a burly man with a kind face, jumped out and got to work on my car. As he worked, he glanced at me and the stranger. "You're lucky I got here as fast as I did," he said. His tone was serious. "You know, this road isn't safe at night. It's best to stay in your car." The stranger's demeanor changed instantly. His friendly smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold determination. Without a word, he climbed into his truck and sped away into the snowy night, leaving me with a chilling sense of dread. With my kids safely beside me and our car on the road to recovery, the sense of dread that had hung over me earlier began to fade. The late-night drive home, though still chilly, felt considerably less ominous than the creepy encounter we had just experienced. And as we finally drove away from that desolate stretch of road, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if we had accepted the stranger's offer to take the kids away in his truck. The thought made me feel sick, and I knew we had narrowly escaped a potentially perilous situation. The worst part about all of it was my children's lack of situational awareness. They were so eager to be taken away by a stranger. I made a very conscious effort to teach them more about dangerous situations, and that when mommy looks at them with a big serious expression and tells them something, that they need to listen and do as they're told. I had been chatting with this girl online for weeks, and she seemed like the perfect match for me. So when she suggested we meet at hers, which happened to be in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't resist the adventure. My GPS had guided me through the labyrinth of back roads, with the promise that I was nearing her location. But as I rounded yet another bend, I found myself in the middle of a seemingly abandoned junkyard. Rusty old cars and worn-down buildings loomed in the darkness. The place was only lit by my car and the moonlight. Confusion turned to fear as I realized this was the wrong place. Panic set in when the harsh glare of headlights suddenly appeared behind me. A group of burly men, their faces obscured by the shadows, blocked my way and surrounded my truck. One of them, clearly the leader, approached my window. His eyes were filled with suspicion. "What the hell are you doing here, boy? This is private property." My words tumbled out in a rush as I explained my predicament, that I was supposed to meet someone nearby, but my GPS had led me astray. They exchanged glances, their suspicion turning into a sinister grin. Sure, the leader said, "but you see, we've been having some trouble with trespassers lately. Can't be too careful, you know?" His companions chuckled ominously. Without another word, I threw my car into reverse and backed out of there as fast as I could. My heart was pounding. I turned the car around quicker than I thought was possible, and I fumbled with the GPS, trying to tell it to return home. The men continued to shout at me as I sped away, but my troubles were far from over. My GPS, unable to keep up with my rapid escape, soon led me onto an even narrower road. Darkness surrounded me as I ventured further into the woods. My anxiety was making my legs shake aggressively, and my hands could barely follow simple instructions. With no cell service and no signs of civilization, I was well and truly lost. Suddenly, as if mocking my desperation, a deer bounded out from the shadows and onto the road. Panic surged through me as I slammed on the brakes, screeching almost to a complete stop. The deer barely reacted and just continued to slowly prance down the road. Suddenly, I noticed the rednecks from the junkyard had caught up, their truck now dangerously close behind me. They were leaning on the horn, yelling obscenities, and I really started to feel like I wasn't getting out of this alive. Desperation pushed me to follow the deer. I drove at a crawl, praying the animal would move aside. But it just dominated the road in front of me for a painful amount of time. It continued to run ahead of me. The longer it was there, the more it started to look like some type of demon. It looked like something you'd see in Norse mythology. Its horns looked like human arms reaching into the sky. My heart raced as I watched the creature's every move. The rednecks were relentless, inching closer, their voices growing louder, getting even angrier. The suspense was unbearable. I was trapped behind the deer, with nowhere to go, and a group of hostile men closing in behind me. The narrow road seemed to stretch on forever, and with every passing second I couldn't help imagine all of the different ways that I was going to be killed. The men in the truck behind me were starting to push into the back of my car, and I could hear the revving of their engine, eager to push me off the road. I really started to panic and started honking at the deer. I even contemplated abandoning my car and fleeing into the darkness, but I knew that would be futile. They would catch me within moments. As we continued our awful drive on that terrible road, the deer suddenly leaped to the side, disappearing into the dense underbrush. I seized the opportunity and accelerated. When I looked back in my mirror, I saw the deer jump out again right in front of their truck. They slammed on the brakes and were frantically shouting at it to get out of the way. I'm sure they had no issue with killing a deer, but ramming it with their truck at that slow speed would likely just make it angry, and it wouldn't be worth the damage. I didn't hesitate for a second as I went full speed down the rest of the road, hitting every bump with no regard for the condition of my car. I drove for what felt like hours, my heart still pounding, until I finally stumbled upon a small town. There, I found my bearings and eventually made it to the nearest motel. It was only when I locked the door behind me that I felt safe enough to breathe. As I lay in bed, trying to process what had happened, I couldn't help wondering about that deer. Was it merely a coincidence, a strange twist of fate? Or did it know what it was doing, sensing my fear, deciding to lead me away from danger and preventing them from chasing me? I'd almost completely forgotten about my date, and when I checked the app to tell her what had happened, she'd unmatched. I have mixed thoughts about the whole thing. Was she a catfish the whole time, luring me into danger? Did she think that I had ghosted her, so she unmatched out of embarrassment? I kind of believed that she set me up either as a prank or as part of the junkyard group. What their plan was, I'm not sure. But I've given up with dating apps. A few years back, I'd just gotten my first bike. As a young female rider, I often attracted unwanted attention. People couldn't help but notice me as I cruised through the streets. It was exhilarating, and I loved the feeling of the wind and the freedom of the open road. Most bikers I came across were so kind and welcoming, and there's a really strong community. But there were times when the attention crossed a line. One evening, I was riding home after a long day. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the sky. The road was quiet, just the way I liked it. My bike growled beneath me, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But then, as I pulled into a gas station to top up my tank, I noticed him, a young guy on another bike, maybe in his 20s. He parked beside me, and our eyes met. I offered a polite nod, thinking he'd move on. Instead, he removed his helmet and started chatting. He had a friendly smile and an easygoing demeanor, and although his confidence was admirable, something about his persistence set me on edge. We talked for a few minutes about our bikes and the thrill of riding. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was being a bit too forward. I nodded and kept my responses short, hoping he'd eventually get bored and ride off into the sunset. However, that wasn't his plan. After filling up our tanks, he hopped back on his bike and revved his engine, indicating that he was going to follow me. Anxiety began to creep in as I realized this stranger wanted to ride with me. This wasn't completely unheard of. I'd gone side by side a few times with some other bikers until we both go our own ways. But I was heading home, and I didn't want to be followed. As the miles rolled by, he continued to ride beside me, occasionally trying to impress me with a wheelie or a burst of speed. It wasn't overtly creepy, just persistent. I decided it was time to lose him. I knew my bike and its capabilities well, so I hit the throttle, speeding away from him. The wind rushed past me as I pushed my bike to its limits. He caught up again, and I realized that I wasn't going to lose him. I decided to pull over, and he pulled up next to me. He was so proud of himself. He took off his helmet and had a massive grin on his face as if we'd been playing a fun game. I told him I was heading home now and that I'd see him around. He continued smiling at me and told me he'd make sure I get back safe. I really wasn't in the mood. I kind of snapped and told him directly that I was good and didn't need an escort. Just as I started to leave, I gave him a wave. One last attempt to make it clear that I was saying goodbye, leave me alone. He'd rested his helmet down, so it took him some time to get ready. I managed to get some serious distance this time. Glancing back, I saw him in the distance, desperately trying to catch up. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins as I weaved through the winding roads. But the persistent rider wasn't giving up. He was closing in fast. I could hear the roar of his engine growing louder, and I knew I had to make a decision. Ahead, the road took a sharp turn. I had to slow down to navigate it safely. That's when he saw his chance to overtake me. He revved his engine, racing forwards. But he misjudged the turn, and before I knew it, he slammed into the wall with a deafening crash. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in shock. He flew over the barrier, disappearing into the darkness. Without hesitation, I screeched to a halt and rushed to the edge. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it into the water, desperately trying to spot him. It was almost pitch black, and I'd barely even seen how far he went. All I know is that I saw him fly straight ahead. He clearly landed in a river, but it was really wide, and visibility was minimal. I shouted for him, whilst pulling out my phone to call for help. The river was moving fast. He could have easily been miles downstream by the time help arrived. I stayed there for hours that night, searching for this stranger, desperately hoping that we'd find him. I had this awful feeling of guilt. One moment I was racing away from him, the next, I wanted nothing more than to see him alive and well. I still wrestle with the idea that it was my fault. I didn't even give him a chance to explain why he was going the same way as me. They never did find his body. That river has claimed many lives over the years, and I feel like I contributed to it.